My name is Amanda Wireman, and I'm from the Marriage and Family Therapy Program at Texas A&M Central Texas, and this is for Diversity 509. Well, I think first off, the most important thing is to make sure that you don't cause harm. And so if you lack a knowledge of diversity or cultures with the demographic that you're working with, you can really cause a lot of damage. They're already coming to you as a therapist because they have a problem and they need help solving that problem. So if you introduce yet another problem that they're feeling judged or discriminated against, they may leave, they may not seek treatment again. So the first thing I would say would be to not cause harm. The second thing is to be as effective as possible. So obviously as therapists, no matter what practice we use with our clients, our goal is to be effective and help find solutions for these clients. The next thing is just to make sure that you create a safe space. A client should feel welcome in whatever facility you're in, and they should feel welcome with you. And if they feel like you're hostile or judging, or that they notice a bias, or they notice that you don't really understand them, they probably are not going to open up to you or come back. Well, one thing that we had actually talked about in our ethics class was a scenario where an Eastern family had a college-age son named Ling, and he was wanting to leave college, move out of his parents' home, and he wanted to pursue a career as an electrician. Well, the problem was their family structure and the way that they were set up was that a child was very involved with their extended family, the family was involved in their decision making, and they wanted him to go to college and to become a doctor. Well, Ling didn't want to do that. And so a disastrous example of someone not being receptive to their culture and the way that their family structure is would be a therapist to say, oh, I think you should totally move out. Move out, and if you want to be an electrician, do it, and I can help you find apartments. Well, what they don't see on the flip side of that is the turmoil they've created in Ling's family. And then also not to mention the fact that they haven't really explored Ling's options. Maybe Ling can't provide for himself. If he's living at home, mom and dad are doing all of that for him. And so by encouraging him to strike out on his own, I mean, he eventually would figure it out. It's kind of a sink or swim scenario, but at the same time, it's not your job as a therapist to put your client in a potentially dangerous situation. The other thing too is that there's another aspect of diversity that as a therapist we have to be aware of. In a lot of our reading, we talked about first generation immigrants coming to America, or coming anywhere, but specifically we're therapists in America. And the big thing is understanding what your client wants with their culture. Do they want to retain their culture? So they want to live in America, but they want to continue practicing their traditions and their cultures the way they always have, or are they wanting to assimilate and they are wanting to add some Western American culture to their pre-existing culture? Or are they wanting to completely immerse themselves, become completely westernized, and cast off their previous traditions and cultures? And I think as therapists, it's important for us to not just understand that they have a culture and what it is, but to understand what exactly they're wanting of their culture and how they're wanting to use it. And so in doing that, we have to make sure that we're sensitive to our clients' autonomy and also their culture. Well, I think that the very first thing that we as therapists have to understand is that we have a lot more opportunities than our theorists that we're learning about in class did in the 60s and the 70s. For them trying to understand diversity, the country was not nearly as diverse as it is now, and when it was, or in the places that it was, they were very isolated. And so they didn't necessarily come in contact with diverse populations. We, however, live in a very global society here in America, and thanks to technology, we are connected to literally any country that we can imagine, any culture, any diverse population in the world. Because of that, though, we have a much greater responsibility to make sure that we are sensitive to those demographic groups. I think that what's really important is also making those connections in those groups. So if you know that in your area you're going to have a high population of one particular culture, maybe seeking out a therapist from that culture, whether it's stateside or abroad, and kind of asking them for a consultation. I think that would be highly beneficial, especially if you don't really understand that culture. And that kind of leads me to the third point, and that is that you have to really know yourself as a therapist. You have to be very honest. And that's another thing we've talked about this semester, is making sure that you understand who you are, where your deficits are, where potential biases are, where potential judgments may come out, because we are not supposed to do harm. We're supposed to be helpful to our clients. So really understanding yourself, if you know, okay, I have a bias towards this group, or I lack a lot of education with that group, then that's really where you need to throw yourself. Making sure that you're checking out trainings and different certifications you can get, things like that online. If you go on the AAMFT website, there's plenty of conferences that are held by the state and also nationally recognized conferences. You can go to those, sign up for cultural seminars. There's trainings, modules online you can take. A lot of times, depending on where you work, if you work in an actual center and you're hired on as a staff, they may provide diversification training for you, but you really have to monitor that. And I know me personally, what I'll make sure I do is looking at my portfolio year after year, making sure that I'm including cultural diversity into my portfolio of training every single year. Another thing that's really important too, and I've seen this a lot as a teacher, is making sure that you really know who's walking in the door. And I had spoken about it earlier about how you need to really understand the relationship of the client to their culture. And a big part of that is sometimes we can go to the opposite end of the spectrum. We can go from being completely uneducated about a culture to assuming something about a culture that a client actually doesn't identify with. So we make judgments a lot of times based on how someone acts or what their family looks like or stories that maybe they have told us, and we make an assumption, oh, you're associated with this culture, and because of that, we treat them differently, or we kind of pass on certain behaviors and don't address them because we assume, oh, that's a cultural difference. And that's where it's so important for us to really educate ourselves about those cultures and really understand what we're getting into and who we're dealing with in a scenario. So in teaching, I see that day in and day out. When students come in, you really just have to look at them as the human being and not as the culture, and then use the culture as a tool to help you develop that relationship with that person.